It was Mother's Day, and I got on my bike and I biked around the block. My family was with me. They're running along the side. They're crying. I'm crying. And that's when I realized that nobody knew what might be possible. Who knows how back to normal I might be able to get.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrador. This is episode 83, and my guest is Dr. Terry Wahls. Terry is a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. She is also a clinical researcher, author, and speaker. Terry was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis, over 15 years ago. Being a doctor and a researcher, she knew it was a degenerative disease, so she began researching and looking desperately for a cure or anything to actually slow its progress. She was declining when she began turning to real food. And its power turned her health around. Now she is an author, a speaker, and she is an advocate for the power of real food in recovery from multiple sclerosis and a host of other conditions. Before we dive into the conversation, we want to acknowledge our sponsors. Wise Traditions is supported in part by Chelsea Green Publishing, the politics and practice of sustainable living, and it's now an employee-owned company. Check them out at chelseagreen.com. And hey, everybody, I'm going to be in LA mid-July, and I'm setting up an event. Would you like to join me and participate in a recording of a live podcast show? I'm going to be with Hillary Boynton. Hillary is amazing, and she is the author of Heal Your Gut. I interviewed her for episode number 63 called Heal Your Gut, and she has more good stuff to tell us. So stay tuned for details on that event in mid-July in Los Angeles with me and Hillary of Live Yum Yum. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Terry.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You have a remarkable story. That's why we had to have you on the show. I understand you were diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in the year 2000 or so. Tell us a little bit about what happened next.
I'm an academic physician, so when I was diagnosed, at that point I was still walking. I could still jog a little bit. I read the literature, saw that this is a progressive disease often, so I decided to get the best treatment that I could, being academic, going to be aggressive. I went to the Cleveland Clinic, saw their best people, took the newest drugs, and within 3 years, my disease converted to the progressive form. At that point, I needed a tilt-recline wheelchair. I took mitoxantrone, and then when it became available, I took that new biologic drug, Tysabri, and continued to decline. Then was switched to Cellcept, continued to decline. All in all, I declined over 7 years.
Terry, you're talking about this. As a physician, you're used to dealing with the facts, and I hear that in your voice, but I want to go a little bit deeper. How did you feel when you first got that diagnosis? You must have been devastated.
Oh, my God. It was awful. Well, I started reading some science stuff, and I saw that it was going to be progressive, and I was terrified. I was terrified of becoming disabled. Mm-hmm. I did not want to become an economic burden to my family, and so I decided that I would have to treat my disease as aggressively as I could. But as I was getting steadily worse, despite taking the best drugs from the best people, that was very deeply concerning. And then I went back to reading the literature and decided I would have to start experimenting on myself because conventional medicine was not going to stop this slide into a bedridden and demented life.
Oh my gosh. And you were in a tilt-recline wheelchair? Like, what the heck? I don't even know what that is. But it means you were so bad you couldn't even sit up, it sounds like, right?
I could not sit up anymore.
Wow.
I was either flat in bed or I was in a fancy chair where I could recline with my knees higher than my nose. I had severe fatigue. I had pain that was difficult to control. I was beginning to have problems with brain fog. And, my big fear was I was going to end up in a nursing home, becoming a huge economic drain on my family. Mm-hmm. And as my pain was getting to be more and more severe, any sensory input, sound, light, breeze on my skin would trigger a paroxysm of horrific pain.
Oh my goodness. But is this the experience that most MS patients have?
Well, if you have trigeminal neuralgia, yes. if the nature of MS is it's a progressive disease, and so when people go from relapsing remitting to secondary progressive, that's when the disease becomes difficult to treat and you get progressively worse year after year, progressively more severely disabled.
Oh my
That's when the
goodness.
cost, physical cost and the financial cost really pile up.
Now, since you had brain fog, it must have been so difficult to concentrate to do this research to find alternatives to conventional medicine. However, did you do it?
Well, every day I would go to pubmed.gov and I would begin searching. Every day I'd try to read an abstract, I'd read a paper. And over time, working a little bit every day led to slowly beginning to add some vitamins and supplements. And those slowed my decline, but they did not recover me. It wasn't until I figured out I needed to use food.
Food as your medicine. Us Wise Traditions folks are big on that. But most
Food is
people
big.
wouldn't even think that. So what was the first thing you saw that pointed you to that?
When I was reading the basic science, it's so much easier to do supplement-based experiments. So that was all the stuff that I was finding was supplement stuff, and that's what I was experimenting. And in the fall of 2007, I had this big aha moment, like, instead of focusing on all these supplements, I should figure out where these nutrients were in the food supply. And of course, that was hard to find as well. My medical text didn't have it. The science library didn't really have that. It was the Linus Pauling Institute. When I was going through their micronutrient database, I began to piece through what are the foods that I should be eating.
So what was one of the first things that you changed? What was one of the first things that you added?
Well, in 2002, my Cleveland Clinic doctors told me about the paleo diet. And after 20 years of being a vegetarian, I went back to eating meat. And so I'd taken out all gluten, all dairy, all eggs, and was eating meat and some vegetables. What I did that was remarkable in 2007, when I went back to what food do I need to be eating, I paid attention to what I had to eat, not what it was that I couldn't eat. So I was stressing a lot of greens. I was stressing a lot of cabbage and onion family vegetables. And I went back to eating liver. I had liver 2 to 3 times a week.
And I can hear a silent cheer coming from our audience right now. We are so big on organ meats. Traditional peoples went for the organ meats first because they knew they were the most nutrient dense. So that's fantastic. Yes. And so what sort of changes did you start to notice in your body?
It's really quite remarkable in that first month, I could tell that my mental clarity was much improved. My energy was much improved. And at 3 months, I was out of the wheelchair walking with a cane.
Oh my gosh. What was your family thinking at that time?
Sort of interesting that when you have a progressive illness, you get to a certain point where you get that acceptance of this is my lot, I have a progressive illness, and I'm just going to take one day at a time.
Yeah.
So at this point, I'm remarkably better, but I'm still taking one day at a time. I don't know what any of this stuff means. I'm walking with a cane, then I'm walking without a cane. I'm walking around the block without a cane. This is remarkable.
It is.
But
wow.
I'm still taking it one day at a time. And I remember asking my partner, Jackie, if she thought maybe I could bike again someday. Because I love to bike, and I hadn't biked probably in 6 years. And she was saying, well, maybe in another 6 months. In the following month was Mother's Day. I got on my bike and I biked around the block. My family was with me. They're running along the side. They're crying. I'm crying. And that's when I realized that nobody knew what might be possible. Who knows how back to normal I might be able to get. And that's really when I allowed myself to think this is real. This is going to be sustained. That my physicians don't know. They don't really understand what progressive MS is anymore.
Wow. It just sounds fantastic and wonderful and marvelous and mind-blowing to picture you on a bike on Mother's Day, when sometime earlier you were in a wheelchair and unable to do some basic things, and now you were getting that far. That is amazing. So I know you didn't hold on to this information to yourself, right? When did you decide I've got to let folks know this is a way to go?
So, this changed my clinical practice. I started talking more and more about food and diet and lifestyle and less about drugs. So I changed how I practice in primary care, how I practice in my traumatic brain injury clinic. Then I decided to call my local food co-op, organic food store, and I offered to do a public lecture. And that was a huge success. So I started giving lectures regularly to the local food co-op and the local community college.
So you had an audience. People must have been astounded, especially the people who knew you when you were
Oh, yeah.
declining, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah,
it's almost
yeah.
like I was once dead and now I'm alive. It sounds very biblical to me somehow.
It was. It also felt very spiritual, this journey of decline and recovery.
I guess so. Tell me more about that.
It certainly gave me a new perspective on life, on purpose, life's meaning. I felt like I had this moral obligation because if I could come back from as profoundly disabled as I was, then others could come back as well. And so I felt this moral obligation to start telling the public that here's what I did, here's the science behind what I did. And you can decide, you can run your own experiment on yourself, making these dietary changes, and see if it's worth continuing or not.
And the protocol you began recommending, was it only for MS patients or was it for a broader range of concerns?
So far, what we see is that it's very helpful for a wide variety of autoimmune problems. It could be MS, it could be lupus, RA, scleroderma, other autoimmune conditions. It could be other mental health or neurological problems. So it's great for depression, anxiety, bipolar, Parkinson's. We've had some very nice success with Alzheimer's. And then very good for traumatic brain injury. And in my primary care clinic, it also worked very well for the primary care kind of problems, high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, heart disease.
Yes, I was just talking to a friend the other day who said her doctor was blown away that all her numbers were so good and that she wasn't on any meds. This woman is in her 50s. And I think a lot of people on the standard American diet find themselves with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, all these issues. And then they find themselves on these drugs to combat the problem, not realizing that food could be their medicine.
And that the drugs, because the drugs cause more nutritional deficiencies, accelerate the progressive diseases.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to ask you, because you have seen patients and you've been recommending your protocol, can you tell us a story of a patient you've seen maybe in the past 6 months and some encouraging progress they've seen?
Oh, sure. I think many of us are the worst disease you can think of is Alzheimer's. And so we have a family friend who developed Alzheimer's, had to quit working as a PhD. And I worked with this family to implement our protocol. And my friend's been on this now for 18 months. Remarkable improvement, remarkable return of memory, remarkable functional gains using diet and lifestyle.
Wow. Terry, how does your protocol or your diet that you recommend, how does it differ from the Wise Traditions diet? Because, we say whole real foods, grains properly prepared, raw dairy and all that. Is yours in line with that or a little bit different?
Well, so it's a little bit different. So I'll stress the similarities first.
Okay.
So we're definitely into food. We're both into lots and lots of vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
We both love lots of fermented foods.
Mm-hmm.
We both love traditional meats, organ meats. And I think we both like a lot of seaweed. Nuts and seeds
Yes.
are fine. I don't have people consume gluten, and I do give people the option of continuing to have legumes and grain if they soak them.
Good.
So that they decrease the lectins and the phytates. Depending on their circumstances, I may suggest a grain and nut and seed free, depending on their circumstances. So they may be legume grain free.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on their circumstances, I may point them more towards a ketogenic diet.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly a lot of similarity. Things we differ is identify some folks will have gluten sensitivity and some are going to have a dairy sensitivity.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's more and more common. And I think people do find healing through the Wise Traditions diet and GAPS. And sometimes, yes, avoiding those foods that cause a reaction to their body until such time as they may be ready for them again. So, yeah, that's not
correct.
We wouldn't look at someone and be like, oh, you're not on the Wise Traditions diet because you're not eating gluten. No, everybody's got to go with what works for them. But that sounds very much in keeping with what we have to offer. And are there any supplements that you recommend as well?
I think this really needs to be personalized. As soon as you start taking a supplement, you run the risk of overshooting and creating a toxicity if you're not careful.
So you really do need to do it, work with a health professional that can kind of walk alongside you to figure out the right ratio of supplements and
Correct.
that sort of thing.
And to help you know when you've filled your tank and you can stop the supplement now. And so most often you need the supplements on a short-term basis, occasionally long-term, but more often it's a short-term need.
Coming up, Terry tells us about research that is being conducted that compares the diets that are used to treat MS. And she explains why that research is so critical if we want to change the way physicians approach and treat diseases. Now we want to pause and thank our sponsors. Chelsea Green Publishing. They are recognized as a leading publisher of books about organic farming and gardening, homesteading, local food, restorative living, and diet-focused integrative health. Some recent and best-selling health titles include Human Heart, Cosmic Heart by Dr. Tom Cowan, The Alzheimer's Antidote by Amy Berger, and The Metabolic Approach to Cancer by Dr. Nasha Winters and Jess Higgins Kelly. Learn more about these titles and other books at chelseagreen.com. And listeners like you. Hey, and a reminder to stay tuned for details on the event that I mentioned earlier. I'm coming to Los Angeles this summer. It is going to be awesome. And did you know that a lot of our Wise Traditions listeners live in California? If this includes you, please come out and stay tuned for the details. We're talking like July 17th or 18th, and we are finding a venue, which would be nice, right? Healthy food, real food, and a chance for you to participate in a recording of a live show. It's going to be me and Hillary Boynton of Live Yum Yum. So psyched to be coming out your way, LA. Stay tuned. You said that you do clinical research as well. Why is that important?
You know, if we're going to change how physicians practice medicine, we do that on the basis of research studies that show these treatment strategies are effective. And if we want physicians to use more food, and then we need more dietary intervention kinds of studies. And I'm really excited to say that I'm one of those researchers. We're doing a study right now comparing two diets that have been used to treat MS. And it's been funded by the MS Society. And it's lots of fun. And I just think that's a very important thing if we're going to change physician practice.
Now, how does this work? Do you have to pick a group that gets a placebo, or are you having one group do one diet and one group do the other diet? How are you doing this one study in particular?
So how we're doing our study is we enroll people, we have them follow their usual diet for 12 weeks, then we randomize them into steady diet 1, which is the low saturated fat diet, or steady diet 2, which is the modified paleo diet.
And how long has this one been running?
Well, we've been running for about 9 months. It'll take us about 4 years to get the study completed. We'll have 100 people enrolled, and we'll get, with the intent of getting 34 through in each arm of the study.
I see. And I guess this is the kind of thing where you have to put on your clinical researcher hat. You can't be secretly rooting for the one diet over the other, although I guess you kind of are because you know what it's done for you, right?
Well, this is very true. We have to be very, very careful that studies being done without bias. So we have a conflict of interest management plan. We have a statistician who will be analyzing the study diet who's masked, so they don't know which diet 1 is and which diet 2 is. So when the data is analyzed, whichever diet is more effective is going to be the more effective. And then we'll also know, because we have a observation period, how much improvement people have when they go on the study diet compared to the observation period. So we'll know, does diet help? Does diet 1 help? Does diet 2 help? And are either of these diets more effective than the other? It's been very, very, very carefully designed because I want, and the MS Society want, to be sure that there's no criticism about the study being conducted with bias.
Which I think tends to happen a lot. Not in your circles, but you know what I mean? I've heard of, they'll say this study was put out by X company, and that company actually wants a certain outcome.
That is a big risk. When you have drug-sponsored studies, that's a huge risk. Mm-hmm. Presumably, when you have investigator-initiated studies, we have less risk. If the investigator has a risk for bias, then the standard thing is you're supposed to have a conflict of interest management plan in place to be sure that the study is going to be conducted fairly and without bias.
Right. That's what you need to have. Yeah. You know what I like about the Weston A. Price Foundation is they do research. That's one branch of their activism is finding out what the science is to see if it supports what
Yeah.
we're doing and, kind of shipping it out to someone else so that we can't be like, oh, well, we want it to be that liver is good for you or whatever.
Right.
But it's lovely because, like you said, it will be more persuasive both for scientists that aren't a part of our ancestral health movement, if you will, and then for the general public at large to see these objective results.
It's so important.
So you told me a moment ago, Terry, that you think this protocol that you're recommending and focused very much on real food helps people with all kinds of conditions. Is that right?
Correct. I have so many people following me. I've had people contact me because it's been helping their young children with behavioral issues, with autism spectrum stuff. And I have families telling me about autoimmune conditions that I've never heard of. I have to go look up what's going on. I think when people get good nutrition, their organs work better and their symptoms will decline, whatever their chronic health issues are.
Mm-hmm. So true. I was just thinking, sorry, I spaced out a minute because I was thinking we need to call this episode Food is Medicine or something like that, because that's really what you're talking about.
Correct. Our diets have become so poor. Our cells are so starved for the building blocks they need to run the chemistry of life that when we get people fired up again about, vegetables and liver, and the cells have the building blocks, they begin working better, cells work better, symptoms go down, energy goes up, joy goes up. That's very reproducible.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Legos, and how they all connect and build a cute little building or castle or whatever your kids want to do. But imagine if the Legos were broken and then you couldn't really build much of anything, right? So we want to build healthy lives. We need the tools to do so. And the foods have the nutrients that our cells are starving for. So tell me, Terry, what are you looking forward to? What do you foresee happening in this field in the future?
Well, I'm so blessed because I had a number of people with philanthropists who've contacted us, have donated to my research lab. So we're able to add in some basic science studies. I have some scientists who look at gene expression, who look at the microbiome, look at metabolomes, who are analyzing some of the blood and urine and stool that we've frozen along the way. We are looking at some more support because I have lots more data from my first two studies that I've not yet analyzed. So that's very exciting. Another thing that I was working on this morning is that we have a proposal to do our study in the setting of ALS, because I've had so many families with ALS who have contacted me to tell us that our protocol has stopped the decline and the worsening that they'd been seeing due to their ALS.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So, yeah.
Wow. So I want to ask you two more questions. One is, some people say that MS, Alzheimer's, dementia, and some of these other concerns actually have mercury as a problem at the core. What do you think of that? Have you heard that buzz at all?
Yes. So the amount of mercury that's being released into the environment certainly is steadily increasing, and the diet is poor, so our ability to dump that mercury out is compromised. It certainly can be a factor for many, many conditions. Mercury poisoning, lead poisoning, arsenic poisoning, cadmium poisoning, mineral deficiencies.
So does your protocol recommend some kind of detoxing from that stuff?
Well, the protocol was designed very specifically to improve your ability to detox.
Oh, I see.
And in my clinical practice, I tell my patients that I think they are likely have a high burden of toxins, and we need to improve the efficiency of their detox capacity in their liver and their kidney and their sweat glands.
Mm-hmm.
So, they could just get my books and follow the protocol, and that will greatly improve their detox. And in my books, I talk about some very specific strategies to improve detox. Again, I tell everyone, the protocol was designed around improving detox.
Got it. That's going to happen as a byproduct almost. You eat the liver.
Yes.
You eat these different things and your body's like, okay, now I can get rid of this burden that I'm dealing with. I just feel for this generation with all the mercury and toxins that are coming at them, I think their bodies are just really struggling. So if we don't have an autoimmune condition today, we might tomorrow if we, aren't careful.
Yeah. An autoimmune condition or a neurodegenerative problem, very much they're at risk because of all the mercury that's out there.
It's wild. So I often ask at the end of the program, Terry, if the listener could do one thing to improve their health, only one thing, what would you recommend that they do?
Well, I'm going to suggest two things.
Okay.
One, I would encourage them to pick up my books. They could learn about this and be inspired by it, and to add lots more vegetables, and particularly lots more green leafy vegetables. So cooked greens every day and adding liver once a week. Very powerful strategies.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time today, Terry. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
My guest today was Dr. Terry Wahls. Learn more about her protocol, seminars, and resources on her website, terrywahls.com. That's Terry, Terry, Wahls, WAHLS.com. Or just go to the podcast page on the westinaprice.org website and look for the show notes for episode 83. You'll find links to Terry's books, episode highlights, and more. Hey, and thanks so much to the team at Podcast Village for helping with editing and other tech stuff. Podcast Village offers all kinds of supports for podcasters. Check them out at podcastvillage.com. Hey, and if you're still listening, look for me at my new website, holistichilda.com. You can also follow me at holistichilda on Twitter and at holistic_Hilda on Instagram. I look forward to connecting with you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with others. Post a link on Facebook or Twitter, or send a link to a friend in an email, or simply review Wise Traditions on iTunes. Sharing the podcast is one way to spread the important message of health through nutrition. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.